Marcus Johnson walked through the busy airport terminal with his black backpack slung over one shoulder. He wore a simple gray hoodie and dark jeans after spending 3 long days at a tech conference in San Francisco. His company had just closed a major deal worth $50 million, and he was heading home to New York for the weekend before flying to London for another important meeting. The boarding announcement for Flight 447 echoed through the gate area. Marcus pulled out his phone to check his boarding pass one more time. First class seat 2A. He had earned this upgrade through years of frequent flying and countless business trips that had built his company from a small startup to a major corporation. As passengers began lining up, Marcus noticed how everyone seemed to be in their own world. Business travelers typed frantically on laptops while families with children gathered their belongings. The usual airport chaos surrounded him, but Marcus felt calm. This was just another flight in his busy schedule. When his boarding group was called, Marcus walked down the jetway and stepped onto the aircraft. The plane was a large Boeing 777 with spacious first-class seats up front. He moved toward row 2 and began putting his backpack in the overhead compartment above his assigned seat. Sarah Mitchell had been working as a flight attendant for 8 years. She prided herself on maintaining order and ensuring passengers followed proper procedures. As she walked through the first-class cabin, checking on early boarding passengers, she noticed Marcus at seat 2A. Something seemed off to her. The young man looked too casual for first class. His clothes were wrinkled, and he carried only a simple backpack instead of the expensive luggage she usually saw in this section. Most first-class passengers were older business executives in suits or wealthy travelers with designer bags. Sarah approached Marcus with a polite but firm smile. "Excuse me, sir, I think there might be some confusion about your seat assignment," she said in a voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Marcus looked up from organizing his belongings in the seat pocket. He had been reaching for his noise-canceling headphones when the flight attendant interrupted him. "Is there a problem with my seat?" he asked calmly. "Well, I just want to make sure you are in the right place," Sarah replied while glancing at other passengers who were now watching the interaction. "Could you please show me your boarding pass so I can verify your seat assignment?" Marcus felt a familiar, uncomfortable feeling in his stomach. He had experienced similar situations before, but it never got easier. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, displaying his digital boarding pass clearly showing seat 2A in first class. Sarah looked at the boarding pass, but her expression remained doubtful. "Sometimes there are computer errors with seat assignments," she explained. "Let me just double-check this with the gate agent to make sure everything is correct. Would you mind stepping aside for just a moment?" Other passengers in first class were now openly staring at the situation. An elderly woman in seat 1B whispered something to her husband, while a businessman in seat 3A looked up from his newspaper with curiosity. Marcus could feel their eyes on him and knew exactly what they were thinking. "I have been flying with this airline for over 10 years, Marcus said, keeping his voice steady and professional. "My boarding pass is valid, and I would prefer to remain in my assigned seat. If you have concerns about the seating arrangement, I would be happy to speak with your supervisor." Sarah felt challenged by his response. In her experience, passengers who belonged in first class did not question her authority or create scenes. They simply cooperated with crew members and appreciated the extra attention to detail. "Sir, I am just trying to help you avoid any embarrassment if there has been a mistake," Sarah said with an edge creeping into her voice. "These seats are very expensive, and I want to make sure everything is proper before we take off." The tension in the cabin was growing thicker by the minute as more passengers boarded and witnessed the ongoing discussion between Marcus and the flight attendant. Marcus remained calm, but his jaw tightened slightly as he looked directly at Sarah. He had dealt with situations like this many times before in restaurants, hotels, and even business meetings. The assumption that he did not belong in first class based on his appearance was nothing new, but it still stung every single time. "I understand you want to be thorough," Marcus said in a measured tone, "but my boarding pass clearly shows seat 2A, and my identification matches my ticket. I have platinum status with this airline, and I fly this route monthly for business. There is no mistake here." Sarah felt her cheeks getting warm as she realized the passenger was not backing down like she expected. Most people in similar situations would simply move to avoid confrontation. His confident response made her more determined to prove she was right about the seating error. "Sir, I have been doing this job for 8 years, and I know when something looks unusual," Sarah replied while crossing her arms. "Your ticket might say first class, but sometimes the computer system makes errors, especially with last-minute upgrades. I need to verify this with the gate agent before we can proceed." A businessman in seat 3C put down his tablet and watched the exchange with growing interest. He had never seen a flight attendant question a passenger's seat assignment so persistently. The elderly couple in row 1 were whispering to each other and shaking their heads in disapproval, though it was unclear which person they were criticizing. Marcus pulled out his wallet and showed Sarah his platinum status card along with his driver's license. Both clearly displayed his name, which matched his boarding pass exactly. "As you can see, everything matches perfectly. I would appreciate it if you would allow me to settle into my seat so other passengers can board without delay." Instead of apologizing, Sarah became more defensive. She felt like the passenger was trying to embarrass her in front of everyone. "Well, these cards can be faked sometimes," she said quietly, hoping other passengers would not hear. "I have seen people try to sneak into first class before, and I take my job very seriously." The comment about fake cards crossed a line for Marcus. His hands remained steady, but his voice carried a new edge when he responded. I am going to ask you one more time to either allow me to sit in my assigned seat or call your supervisor immediately. This conversation has gone on long enough, and you are now making accusations that are completely inappropriate." Sarah realized she had made the situation worse, but her pride prevented her from backing down gracefully. She had committed to her position and felt she needed to see it through to the end. "Fine, I will call the head flight attendant," she said while reaching for her communication device. "But I want you to know I am just trying to do my job properly." Other passengers continued boarding the aircraft and had to squeeze past the confrontation happening in the first-class aisle. A young mother with 2 small children looked confused as she tried to navigate around the discussion. A group of business travelers exchanged glances and whispered comments about the unusual scene. Marcus sat down in seat 2A and fastened his seatbelt, making it clear he was not moving voluntarily. He pulled out his phone and began typing notes about the incident, including the flight attendant's name from her badge and the exact time the confrontation began. Years of running a successful business had taught him to document everything carefully. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah stood in the aisle holding her communication device, but hesitating to actually call for backup. She was beginning to realize she might have made a serious error in judgment, but was too deep into the situation to easily retreat. Marcus looked out the window at the ground crew loading luggage while keeping his expression neutral. He had learned long ago that staying calm and professional was always the best approach, even when facing discrimination. But inside, he felt the familiar mixture of anger, disappointment, and exhaustion that came with being judged by his appearance rather than his character or achievements. Jennifer Lopes had been working as a head flight attendant for 12 years and had seen almost every type of passenger situation imaginable. She was in the galley preparing for takeoff when she heard her name being called over the intercom. Sarah's voice sounded tense and uncertain, which immediately caught Jennifer's attention. As Jennifer walked toward the first-class cabin, she could see a crowd of passengers had formed in the aisle. Some were trying to find their seats, while others were openly watching whatever drama was unfolding near row 2. The boarding process had slowed down significantly, and she knew they needed to resolve this quickly to stay on schedule. "What seems to be the problem here?" Jennifer asked as she approached Sarah and Marcus. Her voice was calm and professional, but her eyes quickly assessed the situation. She noticed Marcus sitting confidently in seat 2A with his seatbelt fastened, while Sarah stood in the aisle looking flustered and defensive. "This passenger claims to have a first-class ticket, but I think there might be a computer error," Sarah explained while gesturing toward Marcus. "I was just trying to verify his seat assignment before we take off. You know how important it is to make sure everyone is in the right place." Jennifer looked at Marcus, who remained seated but pulled out his phone to show his boarding pass once again. She examined the digital ticket carefully and then asked to see his identification. Everything matched perfectly, and she immediately recognized his platinum frequent flyer status from the special symbol on his boarding pass. "I apologize for any confusion, sir," Jennifer said to Marcus with genuine sincerity in her voice. "Your boarding pass and identification are completely valid, and you are absolutely in the correct seat." She turned to Sarah with a stern expression that made it clear this conversation would continue later in private. "But I was just being careful," Sarah protested while her voice got higher with stress. "You always tell us to watch for passengers who might be trying to get free upgrades or sit in seats they did not pay for. I thought I was doing the right thing by double-checking everything." Marcus finally spoke up while looking directly at Jennifer. "I appreciate your apology, but this situation has been going on for several minutes now. Your colleague has questioned my ticket multiple times, suggested my documents might be fake, and created a scene that has made other passengers uncomfortable. This is not acceptable customer service by any standard." The elderly woman in seat 1B leaned forward and spoke to Jennifer in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "That young man has been nothing but polite and professional this whole time. He showed his ticket and identification repeatedly, but your flight attendant kept insisting something was wrong. It was very uncomfortable to watch." Jennifer felt her heart sink as she realized how serious this situation had become. She had worked hard to build a reputation for excellent customer service and fair treatment of all passengers. This type of incident could damage not only her career, but also the airline's reputation if it became public. "Sir, I want to offer you a sincere apology on behalf of our entire crew," Jennifer said to Marcus. "This should never have happened, and I take full responsibility for my team's actions. Would you be willing to accept a seat upgrade or any other accommodation we can provide to make this right?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "I am already in first class, and I do not need any upgrades. What I need is assurance that this type of treatment will not happen to other passengers in the future. No one should have to prove they belong somewhere based on how they look or dress." Other passengers were now boarding more slowly as they tried to listen to the conversation. Some pulled out their phones, and Marcus wondered if anyone was recording the incident. In today's world, these situations could become viral videos within hours of landing. Jennifer knew she needed to end this conversation quickly while also making sure Marcus felt heard and respected. The plane was already running behind schedule, and the captain would want to know why boarding was taking so long. The plane finally pushed back from the gate 30 minutes behind schedule. Jennifer had managed to calm the situation temporarily, but the tension in the first-class cabin remained thick. Marcus sat quietly in seat 2A reading emails on his phone, while other passengers settled in for the cross-country flight. Sarah had been assigned to serve the first-class cabin during the flight, which meant she would have to interact with Marcus for the next 5 hours. Jennifer had spoken to her privately in the galley and made it clear that any further incidents would result in immediate disciplinary action. But Sarah still felt embarrassed and defensive about the entire situation. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Jennifer announced that cabin service would begin shortly. Sarah gathered her supplies and began taking drink orders from the first-class passengers. She started at the front of the cabin and worked her way back toward Marcus's seat, taking extra time with each passenger before his row. The businessman in seat 3C ordered a whiskey and soda and received a warm smile along with extra nuts and pretzels. The elderly couple in row 1 asked for coffee and were offered fresh cookies from the oven. Each passenger received attentive, friendly service with genuine conversation about their travel plans. When Sarah finally reached Marcus's seat, her entire demeanor changed. "What can I get you to drink?" she asked in a flat, monotone voice without making eye contact. She stood with her arms crossed and tapped her foot impatiently while waiting for his response. "I would like a ginger ale with ice, please," Marcus replied politely. He noticed the dramatic difference in her attitude, but decided to remain professional and see if her behavior would improve during the flight. Sarah returned 5 minutes later with a small plastic cup half filled with ginger ale and no ice. She placed it on his tray table without saying a word and immediately moved on to the next passenger behind him. The contrast with how she treated other passengers was obvious to everyone watching. Marcus pulled out his phone and began documenting the incident in detail. He wrote down the times Sarah brought his drink the lack of ice, despite his request, and her rude behavior compared to other passengers. As a successful business owner, he understood the importance of keeping detailed records when dealing with discrimination. During the meal service, Sarah continued her pattern of poor treatment toward Marcus. While other first-class passengers received hot towels before eating, Marcus did not get one. When dinner was served, he received a cold meal while everyone else got steaming hot plates. His bread roll was stale, and his salad looked like it had been sitting out for hours. The elderly woman in seat 1B noticed what was happening and felt increasingly uncomfortable. She had traveled extensively throughout her life and had never seen such obvious discrimination on an airplane. During a trip to the bathroom, she stopped by Marcus's seat to apologize for what she was witnessing. "I am so sorry about how you are being treated," she whispered to Marcus. "This is completely unacceptable, and I want you to know that not everyone on this plane agrees with her behavior. You have been nothing but gracious despite this terrible situation." Marcus thanked her for the kind words, but asked her not to get involved for her own safety. He explained that he was documenting everything and would handle the situation through proper channels after landing. The last thing he wanted was for other passengers to become targets of Sarah's unprofessional behavior. As the flight continued, Sarah's attitude toward Marcus became increasingly hostile. She ignored his requests for water refills, walked past him without offering coffee during the afternoon service, and failed to provide any of the amenities that other first-class passengers received automatically. Other passengers began to notice the pattern and started whispering among themselves about what they were witnessing. Some pulled out their phones, and Marcus suspected they might be recording videos or taking pictures of the discriminatory treatment he was receiving. The situation was becoming more uncomfortable for everyone in the first-class cabin as the flight progressed toward its destination. 3 hours into the flight, a businessman in seat 4A was reading the latest issue of Fortune magazine when something caught his attention. He was flipping through an article about young entrepreneurs when he saw a familiar face on page 42. The headline read, "Tech Innovator Marcus Johnson Closes Record-Breaking Deal." The businessman looked up from his magazine and stared at Marcus, who was quietly working on his laptop despite the poor treatment he had been receiving. He read the article more carefully and learned that Marcus was the CEO of Cloud Vision Technologies, a company that had just signed a $50 million contract with 3 major corporations. Unable to contain his excitement, the businessman stood up and walked over to Marcus's seat. "Excuse me, but are you Marcus Johnson from Cloud Vision Technologies?" he asked in a voice that carried throughout the first-class cabin. "I just read about your company's amazing success in Fortune magazine." Marcus looked up from his laptop screen and nodded politely. "Yes, that is me," he replied, simply not wanting to draw more attention to himself given everything that had happened earlier in the flight. "This is incredible," the businessman continued while other passengers began to listen more closely. "Your artificial intelligence platform is revolutionizing how companies handle customer data. I work in tech investing, and your company has been on our radar for months. We have been trying to get a meeting with you for weeks." The elderly woman in seat 1B heard the conversation and leaned over to her husband. "Did you hear that, dear? The young man they were treating so poorly is actually a very successful business executive." She shook her head in disgust at how wrong the flight attendant had been about Marcus. Word began to spread quietly through the first-class cabin as passengers realized they had witnessed discrimination against a prominent CEO. Some pulled out their phones and quickly searched for Marcus's name online, finding multiple articles about his success and recent business achievements. A woman in seat 5B approached Marcus during the conversation and apologized for not speaking up earlier. "I am so sorry about how you were treated during boarding," she said with genuine remorse in her voice. "What happened was completely wrong, and I should have said something at the time." Marcus thanked her for the apology, but explained that he was used to dealing with these situations professionally. He appreciated the support, but did not want other passengers to feel guilty about something that was not their fault. The businessman asked for Marcus's business card and mentioned that his investment firm was very interested in Cloud Vision's expansion plans. Within minutes, several other passengers approached to introduce themselves and exchange contact information. It turned out that the first-class cabin was full of potential business partners and clients. Sarah was in the galley preparing coffee service when she overheard passengers talking about Marcus's identity. She felt her stomach drop as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Not only had she discriminated against an innocent passenger, but she had targeted one of the most successful young executives in the country. Jennifer noticed Sarah's pale complexion and asked what was wrong. When Sarah explained what she had learned about Marcus, Jennifer felt a wave of panic wash over her entire body. She knew this incident could become a major scandal for the airline if it became public knowledge. The revelation about Marcus's identity changed the entire atmosphere in the first-class cabin. Passengers who had remained silent during the earlier discrimination now felt compelled to approach him and apologize for not intervening. Some offered to serve as witnesses if he decided to file formal complaints against the airline. Marcus remained gracious and professional despite the growing attention. He accepted business cards and made polite conversation, but continued documenting everything that had happened since boarding. He knew that his success and status should not determine how he was treated, but he also understood that people often responded differently when they learned about his achievements. A technology reporter who was traveling in seat 6A recognized Marcus from recent interviews and asked if he could write about the incident. Marcus politely declined, saying he preferred to handle the situation privately through proper channels rather than in the media. As news of Marcus's identity spread throughout first class, Sarah realized she needed to find a way to apologize and make things right. But she also knew that anything she said or did at this point might make the situation even worse for herself and the airline. Sarah stood in the galley, staring at her reflection in the metal coffee pot while her hands shook slightly. She had spent the last 20 minutes trying to figure out how to apologize to Marcus without making the situation worse. Every scenario she imagined ended with her losing her job and the airline facing a massive lawsuit. Taking a deep breath, Sarah gathered her courage and walked toward Marcus's seat with a fresh cup of coffee and a selection of premium snacks. She hoped that providing better service might help repair some of the damage from her earlier behavior. "Mr. Johnson," she said in an overly cheerful voice that sounded forced and unnatural, "I brought you some fresh coffee and our finest chocolates. Is there anything else I can get for you to make your flight more comfortable?" Marcus looked up from his laptop, where he had been reviewing presentation slides for his upcoming London meeting. He could see the panic in Sarah's eyes and hear the desperation in her voice. While he appreciated the gesture, he knew it was too little too late. "Thank you for the coffee," Marcus replied calmly, "but I think we are past the point where snacks can fix this situation. The damage has already been done, and multiple passengers witnessed everything that happened." Sarah felt her anxiety spike as she realized her attempt at damage control was failing. In her nervous state, she began talking faster and gesturing more dramatically while trying to explain her earlier actions. "I want you to know that I was just doing my job," she said while waving her hands around. "Sometimes we get passengers who try to sneak into first class, and I have to check everyone carefully. It was nothing personal against you specifically." As Sarah continued her frantic explanation, she knocked over the cup of hot coffee she had brought for Marcus. The scalding liquid spilled directly onto his open laptop computer, covering the keyboard and screen before pooling on his tray table. Marcus jumped up from his seat as coffee dripped from his laptop onto the floor. The computer screen flickered once and then went completely black. Years of important business files, presentations, and client information were potentially destroyed in an instant. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," Sarah repeated frantically while grabbing napkins to clean up the mess. "I am so sorry, this was completely an accident. Let me get some towels, and we can clean this up right away." The laptop contained Marcus's entire presentation for the London business meeting scheduled for the next morning. He had been working on the proposal for months, and it represented a potential $100 million contract for his company. Without those files, the meeting would be a disaster. Is everything all right over here? Jennifer asked as she rushed over after hearing the commotion. She could see coffee everywhere, and Marcus standing over his damaged laptop with a very serious expression on his face. Your colleague just spilled hot coffee all over my computer, Marcus said while trying to assess the damage. This laptop contains critical business files for a meeting tomorrow morning. If the data is lost, it could cost my company millions of dollars in potential contracts. Other passengers gathered around to see what had happened. The businessman who had recognized Marcus from the magazine shook his head in disbelief at the latest development. Several people offered to help clean up the mess, while others pulled out their phones to record the aftermath. Sarah felt like she was going to be sick as the reality of the situation hit her. Not only had she discriminated against a prominent CEO, but now she had potentially caused serious financial damage to his business. Her career was definitely over, and the airline would probably face a massive lawsuit. Jennifer knew this had escalated far beyond what they could handle at 30,000 feet. She needed to contact the captain immediately and alert the airline's crisis management team about the developing situation. Sir, I need to speak with the captain about this incident right away, Jennifer said to Marcus. This has become a serious matter that requires immediate attention from our management team. Marcus looked at his destroyed laptop and then at the growing crowd of concerned passengers around his seat. He realized this situation had spiraled completely out of control and would likely require legal intervention to resolve properly. I think that would be appropriate, he replied while carefully placing his damaged computer in his bag. This incident has caused actual financial harm to my business, and I will need to explore all available options for compensation and accountability. The plane came to a stop at a remote gate away from the main terminal, but Marcus could still see the media presence and knew that his quiet business trip had turned into a very public incident that would require careful handling by both him and the airline. The black cars that Marcus had seen from the airplane window contained some of the most senior executives from the airline's corporate headquarters. CEO Patricia Williams had flown in from Chicago along with the head of customer relations, the chief legal officer, and a team of crisis management specialists. Marcus was escorted off the plane through a private jet bridge that led directly to a secure conference room in the airport's executive terminal. He carried his damaged laptop bag and the detailed notes he had taken throughout the flight documenting every incident of discriminatory treatment. Patricia Williams stood up as Marcus entered the room and immediately extended her hand in greeting. Ms. Johnson, I am Patricia Williams, the CEO of this airline, and I want to personally apologize for the completely unacceptable treatment you received on our aircraft today. What happened violates every principle our company claims to stand for. Marcus shook her hand and took a seat at the large conference table. He appreciated the direct approach and the fact that the airline's top leadership had responded so quickly to the situation. However, he also knew that their rapid response was likely motivated more by fear of bad publicity than genuine concern for his welfare. We have already reviewed the preliminary reports from our flight crew and interviewed several passengers who witnessed the incidents, Patricia continued. Based on what we have learned, there is no question that you were subjected to discrimination and harassment that should never happen to any passenger on any airline. The head of customer relations placed a thick folder on the table containing witness statements, passenger complaints, and a timeline of everything that had occurred during the flight. Marcus was surprised by how thoroughly they had documented the incident in such a short period of time. Mr. Johnson, we want to make this right, Patricia said while opening the folder. We are prepared to offer you compensation for your damaged laptop, full reimbursement for your flight costs, and additional compensation for the discrimination and harassment you experienced. Marcus listened to their initial offer, but knew that money alone would not address the underlying issues that had caused this situation. He was more interested in ensuring that other passengers would not face similar treatment in the future. I appreciate your willingness to take responsibility, Marcus replied carefully, but my main concern is systematic change within your organization. This was not an isolated incident caused by one bad employee. Your flight attendant felt comfortable discriminating against me because she believed her supervisors would support her actions. The chief legal officer took notes as Marcus spoke while the crisis management team exchanged glances about the direction of the conversation. They had expected him to focus on financial compensation, but instead he was raising more complex questions about organizational culture and training. Sarah Mitchell sat in a small airport security office with a union representative and an airline human resources manager. She had already been suspended with pay pending a full investigation, but everyone in the room knew her career was effectively over. The human resources manager explained that the airline had zero tolerance for discrimination and that Sarah's actions had created massive liability for the company. Security footage from the aircraft confirmed everything the witnesses had reported about her behavior. Meanwhile, several passengers from the flight were being interviewed by airline investigators and journalists who had gathered at the airport. The elderly woman from seat 1B gave a detailed account of the discrimination she had witnessed, while the businessman who recognized Marcus from the magazine described the hostile treatment that continued throughout the flight. Social media was already buzzing with reports about the emergency landing, though the specific details had not yet been confirmed. Aviation bloggers and news reporters were trying to piece together what had happened based on limited information from passengers and airport personnel. Back in the conference room, Marcus was negotiating not just for personal compensation, but for meaningful changes to the airline's training programs, hiring practices, and accountability measures. He wanted assurance that discrimination complaints would be taken seriously and that employees who engaged in such behavior would face real consequences. Patricia Williams realized she was dealing with someone who understood business negotiations and was not simply looking for a quick financial settlement. Marcus's demands for systematic change would be more expensive and complicated than writing a check, but she knew the alternative could be much worse for the airline's reputation. The meeting continued for over 2 hours as both sides worked toward an agreement that would address Marcus's concerns while protecting the airline from further legal and public relations disasters. 6 months later, Marcus Johnson stood in the same airport where his emergency landing had taken place, but this time he was attending a very different kind of meeting. The airline had invited him to speak at the graduation ceremony for their new diversity and inclusion training program that had been developed partly as a result of his experience. The training program had become a model for the entire aviation industry, with other airlines adopting similar approaches to preventing discrimination and improving customer service. Marcus had worked closely with the airline's leadership to design practical scenarios and real-world examples that would help employees recognize and avoid unconscious bias. Patricia Williams introduced Marcus to an audience of 200 newly trained flight attendants, gate agents, and customer service representatives. She explained how his willingness to work with the company, rather than simply pursuing legal action, had led to meaningful changes that would benefit thousands of future passengers. When Marcus took the stage, he did not focus on the negative aspects of his original experience, but instead talked about the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or background. He emphasized that good customer service was not just about following procedures, but about seeing the humanity in every passenger. The audience listened intently as Marcus shared stories about other business travelers who had faced similar discrimination and explained how small assumptions could escalate into major conflicts. He challenged the employees to examine their own biases and commit to providing excellent service to everyone. Sarah Mitchell was in the audience that day, having completed her own extensive sensitivity training and community service requirements. The airline had not fired her, but instead had made her case study part of their training program. She would never work as a flight attendant again, but had found a new career in diversity education. When Marcus finished his presentation, Sarah approached him during the break. She had been dreading this moment for months, but knew she needed to face him directly and offer a genuine apology for her actions. "Mr. Johnson, I know I can never undo what I did to you on that flight," Sarah said with tears in her eyes. "I have spent the last 6 months learning about unconscious bias and examining my own prejudices. I want you to know that I am truly sorry, and I am committed to making sure other people learn from my mistakes." Marcus looked at Sarah and saw someone who had genuinely changed during the months since their encounter. He could have remained angry and bitter, but instead chose to see this as an opportunity for healing and growth for both of them. "I appreciate your apology, Sarah, and I can see that you have done real work to understand what happened," Marcus replied with compassion in his voice. "The most important thing now is that we use this experience to help other people avoid making similar mistakes in the future." The airline's discrimination complaint system had been completely overhauled with independent investigators and clear consequences for employees who violated company policies. Passenger feedback scores had improved dramatically, and the company had received recognition for their industry-leading diversity initiatives. Marcus had never sought media attention for the incident and had declined numerous interview requests from journalists and television producers. He preferred to let his actions speak louder than publicity and focused on the systematic changes that would have lasting impact. The damaged laptop from the original flight had been replaced with a state-of-the-art computer, and Marcus had successfully completed his London business meeting despite the delays. His company had grown even larger in the months following the incident, and he had become a sought-after speaker on diversity and leadership topics. As the training session concluded, Marcus reflected on how a negative experience had ultimately led to positive changes for countless people. The discrimination he had faced was wrong and painful, but his response had created opportunities for education, understanding, and growth. The elderly woman from seat 1B had written him a letter months after the flight thanking him for handling the situation with such grace and dignity. She explained that witnessing his response had inspired her to speak up against discrimination in her own community. Walking through the airport that day, Marcus felt a sense of closure and accomplishment. The emergency landing that had seemed like such a disaster at the time had become the catalyst for meaningful change that would benefit travelers for years to come. Sometimes the most difficult experiences in life become opportunities to make the world a little bit better for everyone.